Open this hearing of the Finance and Public Administration Legislation Committee into the 2022-23 budget estimates. I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects on behalf of the committee and the Parliament to Elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. The committee is due to report to the Senate on or before the 22nd of December. We fixed Monday the 16th of January as the date for the return of answers to questions taken on notice. Senators are encouraged to provide those questions to the committee secretariat by Monday the 5th of December. Today the committee will continue its examination of budget estimates for 22-23 with the cross-portfolio hearing on Indigenous matters as listed on tonight's program. Understanding Order 26, we must take all evidence in public, and this includes answers to questions on notice. I remind witnesses that in giving evidence, you're protected by parliamentary privilege. It's unlawful to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to this committee. Such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence. The Senate has endorsed the following test of relevance of questions at estimates hearings. Any questions going to the operations or financial positions of the departments and agencies which are seeking funds in estimates are relevant questions for the purposes of the estimates hearing. I remind officers that the Senate's resolved that there are no areas in connection with the expenditure of public funds where any person has a discretion to withhold details or explanations from the Parliament or its committees unless the Parliament has expressly provided otherwise. The Senate has resolved that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given a reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or to a minister. This does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about how and when policies were adopted. Witnesses are reminded of the Senate order specifying the process by which a claim of public interest immunity should be raised. Witnesses are specifically reminded that a statement that information or a document is confidential or consists of advice to government is not a statement that meets the requirements of the 2009 Senate order. Instead, witnesses are required to provide some specific indication of the harm to the public interest that could result from the disclosure. An officer called to answer a question for the first time should state their full name and capacity in which they appear, which is a nice point, really. I know you do have to be across all of that technical stuff, and I read it as if it didn't matter, but I know many of you have done this quite a few times. But yes, as a courtesy, it's terrific for Hansard if for the first time that you speak, you're able to state your full name and capacity. I'd also like to remind members and witnesses who are appearing via video conference who are not speaking to mute their microphones. And on that note, I will let people know in the room we've got Senator James McGrath, Senator Kerry-Ann Little, Senator Richard Colbeck, Senator Sheldon, myself, Louise Pratt as chair, and online I'm pleased we have Senator Jana Stewart, as well as a number of officials that are also joining us from the NIAA online. I'm pleased to welcome the Honourable Senator Malarndirri McCarthy as Assistant Minister for Indigenous Australians and the Assistant Minister for Indigenous Health, Ms Jodie Bruin, Chief Executive Officer of the NIAA, and other officers. Before we enter into proceedings, I did want to acknowledge the very sad news of the passing of the Chair of the Central Land Council, who appears before estimates, and we are just incredibly saddened to know of his very sudden passing and wish to pay our respects to his family, community, and to the Land Council. Yeah, that was incredibly sad news. Okay, with that short remark on behalf of the committee, I can now ask the Minister and Ms Broun if you'd like to make opening statements tonight.
Thank you, Chair. I will just keep it brief and also certainly express sincere condolences to the Central Land Council and the communities of Central Australia, and in particular the Northern Territory, on the passing of Mr Husin. And I'd also like to take this opportunity on a brighter note to certainly welcome back Senator Stewart from maternity leave. Lovely to see her and looking forward to seeing the baby.
I hope the baby will make an appearance tonight, but we'll see if we can get young Ari on Hansard at some point. Anyway, I will now turn to questions from colleagues, and Senator Kerry-Ann Little will lead off.
Thank you. I hope you can indulge me, Chair. I'd like to acknowledge traditional owners, but also pay respects to Kumanjayi Husin and pass condolences to family, community members, staff of the Central Land Council and elected members. I'd like to first ask questions related to the national voice that's being proposed. In the Legal and Constitutional Affairs estimates, we heard that NIAA are the lead agency for all aspects of the voice.
Senator Little, I'm not sure if the Deputy Chair made you aware, we were hoping to deal with programmatic issues tonight because the bits of Attorney Generals and that crossover we were hoping to do next week. I know there are, but I will. And we had, I thought, made that quite that clear, but I guess it's really up to Minister McCarthy the extent to which we want to stick to that.
Could I just say, if Senator Little has questions that can be answered this evening,
we will.
I think we should try and answer them. And if not, we can still refer some of them to Tuesday night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Little.
Thank you for indulgence, Minister. I'd like to, so I might ask that question again. In the Legal and Constitutional Affairs estimates, we heard that NIAA are the lead agency for aspects of the voice. What form will the national voice body take?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Julianne Guevara, Group Manager, Empowerment and Recognition Group. Senator, so far, as the government has stated quite clearly, the voice obviously is to provide advice to government on matters relevant to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It is a voice to improve policy and programs for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. There is obviously a process underway to engage with First Nations people through the referendum working group on the voice. That working group to date has provided overall principles, which it's shared publicly through its communique on the voice, and those common principles obviously are that it is to provide independent advice to Parliament and to government. It's chosen by First Nations people based on the wishes of its local communities, is representative of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, is empowering, community-led, inclusive, respectful, culturally informed, gender-balanced, and includes youth. It's accountable and transparent. It works alongside existing organisations and traditional structures. It does not deliver programs, and it does not have veto powers.
So that's quite general information, so I probably only need short answers to the following questions. So at this point, you can't tell me who's going to serve on that national body?
Senator, as I said, the working group has had discussions at the principals level at this stage, and as it has indicated, in terms of who would represent, who would be representatives, it's First Nations people chosen on the wishes of First Nations peoples.
Can you tell me at this point how members of the National Voice will be chosen?
Senator, again, if I direct you to the principles that were articulated there, it's chosen by First Nations people based on the wishes of local communities.
So can you tell me how members of the National Voice can be removed?
Senator, as I said, these are the principles that the working group have considered to date. They have not yet sort of completed all of their work. So there are still ongoing discussions about aspects of the voice within the context of the working group.
Can you tell me what fees or remuneration will be received by those people who serve on that voice body?
Senator, no decisions on those issues have been taken to date. Those are matters, of course, that will be potentially explored by the working group. It's the working group who are sort of going through the issues at the present point in time on various matters associated with the voice.
So you would know that the Calma-Langton report had a number of recommendations, was well over 200 pages of work. Will the body adopt the recommendations of that report on the local and regional bodies?
Senator, I think the Minister has indicated and that the Calma-Langton report is a very useful a document. She has stated that is one of the documents that is being considered by the working group in their deliberations on the voice. There is, of course, detail from other areas as well, including the Joint Select Committee from 2018 as well. So there's a number of factors and considerations going into their discussions at this stage.
So when will we get an indication of whether those recommendations that are contained in that report will be adopted by that body or not?
As I said, Senator, the Minister has indicated that those recommendations and the whole entire Calma-Langton report is being taken into consideration as one of the inputs into the discussions of the working group.
So what consultation has been done with state territory governments on voice?
So, Senator, the Minister had a meeting on the 17th of August with her Indigenous Affairs counterparts. There was a media release following that conversation with the Minister's counterparts where it is indicated there that there is support from all states and territories for the process towards constitutional recognition, and it does discuss the fact that there were ongoing consultations and discussions with states and territories around the voice.
So that was all states and territories agreed to that?
Senator, I need to check who was actually present at that particular meeting, but there is, as I said, there is a public press release that was issued for that meeting, which was on the 17th of August.
If you can confirm who was actually at that meeting, that would be helpful, please.
We can take that on
Thank
notice.
you. So the Minister for Indigenous Affairs announced at a speech to CEDA in September that a referendum working group would be established to progress the issue of an Indigenous voice to Parliament. And that working group is apparently made up of 20 individuals. Can you tell me how those individuals were selected?
Yes, certainly, Senator. And in fact, this information, the terms of reference for that particular group are public and available on the NIAA website, and it does contain information around selection of members of that particular working group. If you excuse me for a minute, I'm just...
Is that selection of members or how they were selected?
So, if you bear with me for a moment, Senator, just as I find the relevant paper. Have you got it? You got it.
Simon Gordon, Branch Manager, Constitutional Recognition. So the Minister invited individuals to participate in that group, and in considering who those individuals were, a number of factors were considered in determining the composition of the group, and this is in the terms of reference which are on our website. They included ensuring diversity and inclusivity across gender, age, urban and remote locations, a mix of representatives from community organisations, traditional owners and elders.
So when you say invited individuals, was it a public invitation process that you followed?
The minister wrote to individuals.
To individuals. So invited them directly to provide information about whether they should be considered. Wasn't a public process where you went out there and said, we're inviting interested individuals to put in a registration of interest to contribute to this important work for the nation. It was just...
So that the minister handpicked the 20 people that were appointed?
So, Senator, as said, there were a number of factors considered in determining the composition. The minister invited individuals to participate in the group. The members were asked in advance if they wished to participate in the process. They were provided information as to the roles of the groups and outcomes, and they chose themselves if they wanted to participate.
Sorry, Mike. Did anyone refuse to, based on the information that was provided to them, did anyone refuse to join the working group?
Yes, Senator.
How many?
I don't have those details with me, and I have to take it on notice.
If you can provide that, that'd be good. The selection criteria. Now, you've mentioned some broad selection criteria. Can you tell us the process that was followed to identify within those groups of individuals that were handpicked, what was the selection criteria that was applied?
Senator, as indicated, those are publicly available on the website. The factors that were considered in determining the composition of the group included a range of issues to ensure diversity and inclusion. They were gender, age, urban and remote locations, a mix of representatives from community organisations, individuals, traditional owners and elders.
So what was NIAA's role in that process of selection?
Before you answer, Ms Guevara, I'm just going to indicate that I'll retake the call shortly. I'll give you one more question after this one.
Chair.
Thank you.
Senator, advice was sought from the agency as well in terms of looking at the factors that the minister had identified as criteria for consideration of membership.
Can you tell me how many people were actually invited to participate in that process?
Again, Senator, I'd probably have to take that on notice.
All right. So, another question. What was the requirement that members of the committee, or was it a requirement that members of the committee identify as Indigenous Australians or demonstrate their criteria to meet? And which test were they required to meet, if there was a test?
So, Senator, as I've indicated previously, the criteria were the ones that were indicated in the terms of reference.
So did they have to identify as Indigenous Australians, or did they have to demonstrate descent?
Senator, there are a number of criteria. They're the ones indicated, as I've already indicated in my previous responses.
Perhaps you could provide that so we can get clarity, please.
Senator Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks NIAA for the late night sitting. Just following up from questions, the chosen people, the hand-picked people that the government hand-picked, you know blackfellas hate that, but you went down that path anyway. Can you explain to me how that fits with self-determination?
Senator, as I had indicated, members were asked in advance if they wished to participate in the process. They were provided information as to the roles of the group, what it was about, and basically they chose themselves to, if they wanted to participate by responding to the minister. So in terms of elements that relate to their ability to choose to be on the group, they had the ability, of course, to say no, and as I've already indicated, some did.
Thank you. So that's self-determination in terms of the chosen blackfellas. But what about self-determination for the rest of us?
In relation to consultation on the...
About who's going to represent us in this country. Do you think it's important for the rest of Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people in this country to self-determine who they want, rather than a government picking who they want, shouldn't it be NIAA's mandate to listen to the people? Or I understand you've got to take direction from the minister and the government, but self-determination for the rest of our people across the country, that the process flies in the face of self-determination, right? Because the government goes and says, yep, you're good, you're good, you're good, you're good, you're good. Everyone else, you don't deserve self-determination or free, prior and informed consent about the ones we're picking. So how does self-determination and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples actually fit with this process?
So, Senator, there has been a process obviously established by government for
Yes,
the processes of
I understand that.
seeking views and input from community. This is one way in which they do it, through the referendum working
Through the
group.
hand-picked one.
There is, of course, also a referendum engagement group, the minister, and of course the special envoy for reconciliation and implementation of Uluru Statement from the Heart, consulting with communities and different organisations and individuals on a regular basis, and that's available. The Assistant Minister as well makes representations and seeks community input on a regular basis as well.
So is that the definition of NIAA's self-determining way of working and in line with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, is it? Is that how NIAA works to ensure that our rights are adhered to as First Nations people in this country?
Senator Thorpe, I think I need to step in there because we did go over this in the previous estimates around UNDRIP and self-determination. It's not unusual, and I know I said this at the last estimates, it's not unusual for governments to appoint people. In fact, even with the Tom Calma and Professor Langton consults, and previously with the previous government.
Doesn't make it right though.
It doesn't make it wrong.
Well, tell the rest of the blackfellas out there who are saying that they don't want to be represented by a hand-picked bunch of blackfellas, which
Yeah, but
we
you're
know
talking
has been
about
happening
people,
for
Senator
years.
Thorpe, we're talking about people who do have, history
It's no
in this
disrespect to them.
house. But I think it's important to put it on the record that the 20 people who are on the working group, as well as those on the engagement group, are substantial, have substantial background.
Yeah, and the mob
in
out
this
there
area of the
don't.
history.
They're not
But
substantial,
we
are
need to
they?
start somewhere with being able to go out and work through these organisations and representatives.
You don't sound any different to the last government, which is unfortunate. However, I'll continue with my question. In terms of NIAA's employment, and I know you've answered this once before, I know that you've got lots of blackfellas working in the department, but how many at the executive level?
So, Senator, at the most senior level, obviously the CEO, I'm Ingy Bundy.
Yep.
Obviously, my deputy on my right here, Letitia Hope, is Angelan. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
My deputy on my left is
Murray.
yeah. So, my most senior layer is all Aboriginal people.
How many senior staff?
I'll have to get that figure, but there is a number of. We've probably got different layers, so I'll get my crew to answer that if he's got that information at hand. We'd like to answer that for you.
Paula Brewer, Chief People Officer. I'll just pull the numbers up for you. For our senior leadership actual classifications, we have 21% of our total Indigenous headcount in our senior leadership. That's SES Band 1 and above. of our Band 2 and above, 50% of our senior leadership identifies First Nations.
Thank you. I just want to ask about the New Jobs program. Can you tell me what happened to the 5 remote engagement program pilots?
Yes, thank you. I'll just get the correct people at the table. Thank you.
Good evening, Deborah Fulton, Acting Group Manager for Economic Policy and Programs. I beg your pardon, Senator, the question related to the...
What happened to the 5 remote engagement program pilots?
So the pilots were at points of discussion with the different sites, but they hadn't actually commenced. And what we've been doing is continuing discussions with those groups, but reorienting them to the proposal of the government for a reformed CDP that focuses on real jobs and real wages. So we've been having discussions and workshops with them on how they want to participate in that.
So is it true that 4 of the 5 pilots have been cancelled?
Senator, I wouldn't. The pilots hadn't actually got going. They had established groups who had begun discussions.
Sites?
Well, the sites have had co-design groups form around them, and they had commenced discussions, and they're continuing discussions around how they would like to participate in the real jobs trial.
So is that the reason why you haven't, the department or the government haven't actually made any public statements about the program? Because you're still working it out?
I think I might step in if you don't mind, Ms Fulton. When we came to government, one of the clear areas that we wanted to work on was abolishing the CDP program. Those 5 pilots were in place prior to us coming to government. We were not happy about those 5 pilots. And as part of the job summit that the Prime Minister called for in September, we wanted to be able to have a look at how we could overhaul the community development program, which we know has about 40,000 people on it. Our concern is based on having real jobs in the communities, having real wages, long service leave, and other conditions that come with it with dignity in the workplace. So I don't know if that helps assist with our need to overhaul that whole system.
So do you know what locations you'll be targeting with the new program?
So the first thing that's happened with moving to a new program is the freeing up of 25% of funding within existing CDP provider agreements for them to be able to focus on away from the sort of activity, work-like activities, to trialling pathways to real jobs. And almost all of the providers in the CDP regions have opted into that. They've only just started in November. And there's a range of different things that are underway there. So in that sense, right across the program, really there are opportunities for people to be doing things differently. And then in relation to the budget measure that came through in October, which was a trial of 200 new jobs, the discussion around where those will start is a continuing discussion, but we have in the workshops with the different sites that were under discussion previously begun discussions with those groups on whether they're interested to participate.
Okay, so many questions. Mob have sent all these questions in and I just won't be able to ask them all, but I just want to ask a couple on Jervis Bay. Nobody I've spoken to could point me to who the registrar referred to in the bill. Can you tell me who the registrar is under the Aboriginal Land Grant Act is?
Senator, please bear with me while I just find information on that, and my colleague, I think, will be coming in to provide support. It's not where I put it.
Thank you,
Senator.
Right.
Rachel Kerrigan, Land Branch Manager. The registrar is currently the position of the Eastern Group Manager within the agency.
What is their name?
the current person in that position is Ms Marnie Wetnall.
Senator Thorpe will rotate the call very shortly and make this your last question, if that's okay, please.
What responsibilities do they have?
So that's then part of the bill that's currently before the Parliament. The bill that includes roles such as ability for members to put forward or have complaints, then, referrals, I guess, to look into certain issues that then may be raised by the community.
Okay. Senator Sheldon.
Just a quick question from me, but and thank you for all for joining us tonight. I've asked this question mainly because I think it's important that as this is on Hansard, so it's on the public record, but also I'm kind of interested in what the department's response to this is. In my role as Special Envoy for Disaster Recovery, a number of the conversations I've had with First Nations peoples in both the very north and southern in Eden Valley, Bega Valley, and in the areas of surrounding, that there's been conversations about and particularly I wanted to ask some questions about the Indigenous Rangers program. So one of the things that has been raised is certainly cultural burning and how the program will be settled for cultural burning, where there is opportunities. How's that program placement of rangers? What's the involvement there? And also in the Lismore area, there's been a number of community leaders there that have asked also when the engagement for community. First Nations community in particular, looking at some of the historical and lived experience and passed on experience for dealing with flooded areas, which obviously is demonstrated by some of the poor practices that we now have been applying in urbanisation or township building. So I just want to find out what role do you see the Rangers playing, and what are some of the what's some of the opportunities for placing Indigenous Rangers into those sorts of areas and those sorts of positions?
Thank you for that question. That's a great question. If I can pass to... No? Who am I passing to? Deb.
Thank you.
Ms Fulton?
So within the Indigenous Rangers program, they are Indigenous-led programs, and the focus of those groups tends to be on the priorities that they determine. There are a large number of those groups that do focus on cultural burning and contribute to climate change adaptation and mitigation programs in that context. And we've got a report on our website which gives some good examples of the kinds of activities that ranger groups have been involved in and the kinds of contributions that they can make, which I can direct you to on notice.
Well, I was probably going more to the point about what's the timeline for the program for placement of peoples, and the engagement with community. I know that this has been a consistent position from both the previous government and also this government. So I'm wondering what work's been done on that space, and what's the plan, and what's some of the timelines?
Yeah, so through the expansion of the measure that was put in place at the end of last year, we now have kind of certainty for those ranger groups out until 2028. And we were undertaking some consultations around the priorities that ranger groups wanted for the future development of the sector, if you like. The government is committed to doubling the number of rangers by the end of the decade and increasing the representation of women rangers. And we've undertaken a range of consultations with states and territories on that. We're pulling together feedback from consultations we undertook around developing a ranger strategy and putting that to government on the approach. So we'll hear back around that. We need to undertake some further consultations with the community. It wouldn't be unreasonable to expect that around to open up a combination of expanding range of programs and then creating new groups into the future could open in the first half of next year.
And what sort of numbers are we looking at in the first half of next year potentially? And what's the range?
So it will be likely to go ahead through an open grant round. So we'll develop grant opportunity guidelines. Once those are approved and opened, then it will be for us to see what the response is. There is funding profiled over the duration of the measure, and it's likely that there would be a series of competitive rounds over the coming years to reach that doubling.
And just again, for those that are listening in, looking at Hansard, because for most people, include myself, weighing sometimes through websites and documents and Googling things and all the rest of it can be quite can be challenging at times. Making sure you hit the right button. But so what? Just on the appreciate that people will be making application and there's a round. Is there the criteria for what is likely to be available for areas, regions? How does that interact with the actual application? So if there's equal valued applications from one end of the country to the other, or multiply more in one part of the country than the other, how does that get reflected in the decision-making process?
So the grant guidelines themselves would need to determine the priorities and give those sorts of signals around if they were particularly looking for particular areas of the country where they were interested in expanding numbers or creating new groups, or the example I gave earlier around increasing the representation of women rangers. That would be reflected in the grant opportunity guidelines, and they would also state what the assessment would be based on. So it would then be, that's yet to be determined, but it would then be transparent to all applicants how the process would evolve.
Is there some early concepts or proposals that have been considered?
We have been in discussion internally in government and with states and territories to help inform advice that we would put to government, but there's been no decision yet, and we're yet to provide that advice.
Thank you, Senator Sheldon. Senator Nampijinpa-Price.
Speaking of burning, I've got some burning questions to ask with regard to the voice. Back to the working group, I just want to know, is NIAA providing administrative support, and how many staff are working on this?
Senator, yes, sorry. NIAA is providing administrative support to the group. There's a team that provides secretariat support to the referendum working group and the referendum engagement group. They also undertake some other functions. Just trying to find the exact number of staff in that team. I think it is 5, but we might follow up and we'll correct that if that's incorrect, but I think it's 5.
Thank you. And just going back to your senior leadership group, 50% of which are Indigenous, how many of those who are part of that leadership group have their own traditional language as their first language as opposed to English?
Thanks, Senator. I don't think we keep that information, but that's not something that we have on record.
Okay. Would that be something you'd consider in future, understanding your leadership group and how they're connected in terms of traditionally and or whether they're language speakers?
It's not something that's come up to date.
I think that answers the question. There's probably 0. The working group met for the first time September 29th. Can the Minister please table the agenda and minutes for this meeting? And what were the outcomes of this meeting?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So the working group met for the first time on September 29th. Is it possible for the Minister to table the agenda and minutes of this meeting and provide, I guess, an update, a bit of a understanding of the outcomes of the meeting?
I believe that was at the time when the death of the Queen occurred on that date, and we didn't have a formal meeting. And I think if I remember correctly.
So, Senator, there wasn't a formal meeting on the day of the Queen's passing, and so there is. It wasn't actually a formal meeting of the referendum working group. The first meeting of the referendum working group, and I think you referred to the date as the 29th of September. We would have to take on notice the question on the agenda, but in terms of outcomes, I think you referred to as well, they are contained in a communique, a public communique, which is published on the website.
Okay, and but are we able to understand? We'll have table the minutes of that particular of the meeting that was held, and/or were there other meetings held in this capacity since then, between now and then?
So, Senator, the referendum working group has met on the 29th of September, the 28th of October and the 16th of November. Again, all of the communiques of those meetings are available publicly on the website.
The exact minutes of those, or just the outcomes?
So the only document that's prepared in relation to the meeting is actually the communique, and they're publicly available.
So we can't get access to the actual minutes of the meeting?
Senator, the only document that's prepared in terms of outcomes of the meeting is the communique.
So, but are any minutes prepared for consideration at following meetings? So are there minutes taken at these meetings?
No, Senator.
So no minutes are taken?
No, Senator.
Interesting. So is the work of the working group confidential?
Senator, the communiques for the working groups are publicly available. They do provide details as to, at the broad level, the content of the discussions of that group for people to access publicly.
Without minutes. So that's I guess that speaks to, so that's perfectly fine then for the working group member Tony McAvoy to make posts to his Facebook page with regard to that. Is that part of the strategy of the working group, for working group members to be posting on Facebook?
Senator, I think the working group have chosen to kind of express sort of what they think the outcomes of their consultations and discussions are internally through a communique, which is issued at the end of every meeting.
Okay. Has the working group been provided with the terms of reference?
Yes, Senator. Those terms of reference are publicly available again on the website.
Okay. And how were these terms of reference decided?
Senator, I'm just checking, but they were the subject of deliberation at the first working group meeting.
Okay. Was there any public consultation undertaken in relation to the terms of reference?
For the working group?
For the terms of reference, was there any public consultation undertaken for that?
No, Senator.
Were any stakeholders consulted by the Prime Minister, ministers, the NIAA or their officers with relation to the terms of reference?
I might respond to that if you like, Senator. We have, as I said in the previous estimates, we do have a First Nations caucus committee of the Federal Labor Caucus, and through that First Nations caucus, it is a deliberation of issues around Indigenous affairs, but also provides advice to both myself as well as the Minister for Indigenous Affairs and Special Envoy for Reconciliation, Senator Pat Dodson, And of course, Minister Burney, who's in the Cabinet, is then able to take a lot of that through to Cabinet.
Will the First Nations caucus become redundant if the Voice is established?
First Nations caucus has always been there to advise federal Labor on party politics.
On just party politics? Does that make the Voice redundant if the First Nations caucus exists?
Well, it's actually a good example of why the Voice should exist, because of the advice that comes through our party system, through our Indigenous Labour network across the country, through our First Nations caucus, whether it's at a federal level or at a state or territory, shows that having a voice through those areas of advice to the party is good. What it shows is having a voice to the Parliament that advises on issues affecting First Nations people, irrespective of what party they come from, is important. It's actually a good example, I think, of showing us why having a consultative group is important.
Okay, I think it's wonderful that there's many First Nations voices already in the whole of Parliament taking back. We hear Senator Thorpe here providing questions from members of the Indigenous community that she represents also. Anyway.
I do agree. I think it's important that there is a reflection of all the different First Nations people around the country, and it's done in many different ways and capacities. Anyway, I'm taking up your time. So
These fellas
I'll let
don't
you
want to
back
become
to
advisors, they want real power.
What remuneration will members of the working group receive for their contribution, and how was this decided?
So, Senator, members of the working group receive sitting fees for their participation in the group. That is set at around $823, and it's based on a tribunal settings.
Sorry, is that $823 per meeting, per day,
Per day.
Per day.
which is in line with the previous government's co-design process.
And as I said, it matches the remunerations tribunal. It's set on the basis of the remunerations tribunal.
Has the working group been provided any specific reporting dates?
No, Senator.
Okay. Will there be any specific reporting dates set?
Senator, the working group, in consultation with the chairs, which of course includes the Minister for Indigenous Affairs, they talk about their agendas for meetings and the work ahead.
So the Minister said in September that the working group would consider how to ensure that the Voice is representative of all Indigenous Australians. Has the working group provided any comment to the Minister about how this would in fact be achieved?
Senator, as I had indicated in a previous response, the working group has established a set of principles for the Voice, and it has indicated how members would participate and be selected.
Senator Nampijinpa, you have got a couple more minutes, but I just wanted to flag to Senator Stewart to be ready so I can give her the call next. Please continue.
Okay, just a couple more questions around the funding for the Yes campaign and the No campaign. What funding will be allocated to a Yes campaign in support for an Indigenous voice to Parliament? And what organisations are proposed to receive it if there is funding going to be made available?
I'll jump in there, Senator. I guess it's something that officials are unaware of because it's a decision that will be taken by Cabinet, and that decision hasn't been made yet.
So will there be funding available? Do you think funding will be made available to a Yes and a No campaign?
These are things that are being discussed and given consideration, but no decision has been made yet.
Has consideration been given by the government in providing separate funding for the Aboriginal-led Yes and No campaigns, as would be distinct from campaigns run by non-Indigenous groups?
Just as my previous answer, Senator Nampijinpa Price, no decision has been taken yet.
Is there a date when Cabinet would look at making these considerations?
The only date that the Prime Minister has publicly spoken about is the possibility of a referendum between June, July 2023 to June, July 2024.
So the Prime Minister also indicated that no date has been set for a referendum. Have any dates been
he's given a
considered?
time frame of when it could occur, but not an exact date, yet.
So the Prime Minister indicated he believed more consultation was necessary to pick a date. So who's being consulted in relation to potential dates for a referendum?
Well, at this particular point in time, it's the working group and the engagement group, but it won't be exclusively that.
Can the public participate in this consultation for the consideration of a date?
Oh, I'm sure there's lots of suggestions going to Minister Burney, but I am not aware of that at the moment.
And what government departments or agencies are part of these discussions?
For the working group, NIAA.
Just NIAA? Any other departments or agencies part of these discussions?
So, Senator...
Sorry, can I just... So, sorry, Julia. I'll just answer this and I'll hand over to the official. We do have, as you may be aware, legislation that is to come before the Parliament in terms of pieces of legislation around the referendum machinery, and that has required Senator Don Farrell and his department to be involved in terms of elections, but also the Attorney-General, as you would expect, in terms of constitutional wording.
And what engagement has been undertaken with the AEC with regards to a referendum being held prior to the conclusion of this Parliament?
We'll have to take that on notice.
Okay, that's probably a good spot to conclude, and I'll ask Senator Stewart if she's ready to jump in. You have the call, Senator Stewart.
Thank you. And before I start, I also just want to acknowledge the sorry business that's happened and send my condolences to the community and family. I want to just go back to the conversation that we were having earlier about the CDP, if I can. And I'm just really keen to understand what the CDP has delivered in terms of jobs previously. If someone can shed some light on that, that would be fantastic.
Thank you, Senator. There is a bit audio, but I think your question was about the numbers of jobs delivered from CDP. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll pass over to Senator Fulton. I'm sorry, Ms. Fulton. We've just elevated her.
Thank you for that, CEO. And I'm just checking I heard the question correctly. Sorry, it was a little bit difficult to hear. You were asking how many people had been supported through CDP?
I'm just wondering what the CDP has delivered in terms of jobs.
What has it delivered in terms of jobs? So over the program has evolved, been through sort of various iterations. If I look at the... I will have it. Let me just find it. One moment, Senator. So, over the period, the life of the program, if you like, there's probably been 17,900 or so people who have been placed in jobs and stayed in them for 26 weeks or more over the life of the program. In the last financial year, that number would be 2,525 in the 21-22 financial year. And the program, the program measures job outcomes up to 26 weeks. It doesn't actually retain data for periods beyond that.
Okay, and so 25,025, did you say, or 2,525?
25, Senator, over the life of the program, 25,415.
How many years is that?
That would be since, when did this version come in? 2015, I believe, but I'll just ask my colleague to confirm the start date.
Yeah. And what did you have targets for how many jobs you wanted this to deliver? Just wondering if we were on track or not for jobs that were delivered.
So the caseload for CDP varies depending on the number of people that people come in and move off. There are targets for each individual CDP provider, which are based on an assessment of the caseload, the remoteness of the area. Obviously, the labour markets in remote Australia are thin but also variable, and so there are targets for each individual provider.
Yeah, I don't feel like that was quite an answer. Did we get to the targets previously, or no?
That would the way we would assess that in a general sense is through the provider performance process that we go through 6 monthly, and that would look at how providers are going against their individual target. I don't have an aggregate number for you on that, but I'll just check if my colleague does.
Kate Elliott, Branch Manager for CDP for the Community Development Program. The program itself since 2015 doesn't have a specific target. As Ms Fulton was saying, it's actually the regional employment target is set sort of looking at the trends and the placements that have been achieved through the program. So when the program was announced, there wasn't a specific employment target, is my understanding, but I'll correct that if I'm wrong. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And for the people who participated in the program, like I'm also keen to understand what it delivered in terms of wages and conditions. Can you talk me through what some of that looked like for people?
Senator, you were asking about what it looks like in terms of wages, is that correct?
Wages and conditions more broadly, like, everyone deserves a, fair pay for a fair day's work.
Yeah, so in general, people who are on the CDP caseload are people who are receiving income support and they're receiving case management support through their provider, and they may have been undertaking work-like activities. So they're not drawing a wage, if you like, through CDP as their own income support. If they're placed into a job and they stay in that job, then they're receiving a wage for that 13 weeks, 26 weeks, and hopefully continuing with that employer.
Yeah, and are we confident that all those jobs met all the the minimum wage standards that we've got in this country?
So people who are placed into jobs, they have an employer relationship, and they're an employee of that organisation, and that organisation is required to abide by the relevant Fair Work laws in the state or territory.
Yeah, and who checks that they're doing that?
There isn't a specific part. So once they're in an employer relationship, they would have their rights to, if they felt that they were not being employed under just conditions, they would have the right to make a complaint to that employer or use the relevant complaint mechanisms available in that state or territory. We would rely on the provider who is providing a level of support to that individual while they're on the caseload for that sort of 13 to 26 week period. They would stay in touch with that employee and provide a degree of sort of wraparound servicing over that period, and if there were concerns, it would be raised through that mechanism, I would expect.
Okay. Can I just a different kind of question? What was the cost to government for the program?
So what I could speak to, Senator, is the cost for administering CDP, which is the amount of funding that the agency has under agreements with the various CDP providers. The total cost to government would include a range of other factors such as the income support and other other funding that those individuals might be receiving, and I don't have visibility of that. The cost annually for CDP is it varies a little depending on the caseload, and I could tell you that, for example, in the 2021 to 22 financial year, that cost was $386.1 million. And it tends to be somewhere between that sort of 300 to 400 million per annum, based on the caseload.
Sorry, say that amount again, per annum?
So for the 2021-22 financial year, the cost was 386.1 million.
For a year?
For 1 year.
Okay, and how many people did that program service again for 1 year?
In that financial year, I'm just looking at the caseload. Ms. Elliott, do you know? The caseload right now is just over 40,000 people, and I believe it was slightly higher, but can I just ask you to confirm that?
I might need to take that on notice. There has been a lot of fluctuation in the caseload, so the pre-COVID levels, there's been a 30% increase in the caseload compared to the pre-COVID levels. And at the COVID peak in October 2022, it was at 43,955, and currently it's at 40,113 as at 30th of September 2022. But I'd need to look at the precise financial year figures for you, and we can come back on that.
And just to just explain a little why that is sometimes difficult to be precise about, there are always those people sort of coming on or going off to the caseload, so we tend to look at it at a particular date, a point in time, such as Miss Elliott just indicated, but over the course of a year, the number of people who may have been on or off over that period could have fluctuated quite a while, so we do tend to look at the system data at a particular date.
Okay. I might come back to it later if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you. I'll give the call to Senator Little and then I'll come back to you, Senator Thorpe.
Thank you. Changing a course a little bit, I'm wanting to talk about defining indigeneity. On the 28th of July, the Attorney-General discontinued the High Court case against Mr Shane Montgomery following the Immigration Minister, Mr Giles, revoking a decision to cancel Mr Montgomery's visa. Prior to the discontinuation of the case regarding Mr Montgomery's visa, did the Minister for Immigration or his department consult the Minister for Indigenous Australians, the Attorney-General or his department, or the NIAA?
I can certainly take the question on notice in regards to the Minister, but I'm sure the officials can answer in relation to the NIAA.
Good evening, Senator Tom Allen, Acting Branch Manager, Legal Services Branch. Sorry, I was just making my way to the table when you asked some of the specifics of that consultation. If you can repeat that, please, Senator.
So prior to the discontinuation of that case, was NIAA consulted?
I'd have to take that on notice. I'm unaware of the consultations that took place prior to the discontinuation.
And Minister, the question related not just to the Minister for Indigenous Australians but also the Attorney-General or his department. Are you able to provide that information?
I can certainly put forward the question, Senator Little.
Thank you. Does the government believe that anyone who does not meet the Mabo case test of indigeneity and is not descended or related by blood to an Indigenous person is entitled to claim citizenship by way of indigeneity?
Senator Letitia Hope, Deputy Chief Executive Officer Policies and Programs. Your question went to an opinion. What I can say is that there's been a long-held convention in the Commonwealth used since the 1980s about the three-part test, and it's applied widely across all Commonwealth departments.
I'm going to get to that in a minute. This question related to, well, I guess, has this ever come up before where somebody's not met the test or met the test?
So,
in relation to being descendant by way of blood?
In terms of in terms of
Claiming citizenship.
claiming citizenship. So, Senator, that probably is a matter for Home Affairs or the AGD in terms of citizenship and citizenship legislation.
Okay. In the view of the Minister for
Immigration,
Indigenous...
sorry, Senator. Immigration, I should have said. My apologies.
In the view of the Minister for Indigenous Australians and in the view of NIAA, was the Montgomery case useful in clarifying a legal definition of indigeneity?
Senator, as you know, that matter was discontinued and wasn't eventually heard by the High Court, so that hasn't been determined. And I think we've expressed before, perhaps that's a better question for the Attorney General or the Minister for Immigration, given that that's a matter in that space.
Would that have been useful to NIAA to get confirmation of that?
I'm not quite sure in the context, Senator, because the NIAA doesn't deal with immigration legislation or in any way,
But you
shape
deal
or
with
form.
issues of indigeneity.
So in the context of... So I'm trying to be helpful, Senator, and understand your question. So the NIAA, like all Commonwealth agencies, applies the three-part test that's been established since the 1980s in relation to specific things, but I'm trying to understand the context.
Okay, I'll go to that after this question. Will the government be looking for another vehicle to clarify the precedent in the Love and Thomas case? Does it raise any issues that you intend to continue to have clarified?
Sorry, what was the question? Another vehicle?
Looking for another vehicle to clarify that.
In terms of indigeneity?
The precedent in Love and Thomas around indigeneity.
We're certainly... Sorry?
Oh, sorry.
We're certainly looking at as Letitia Hope has said, in terms of the principles around indigeneity that already are covered across each of the agency. But I can certainly take your question on notice in terms of what the AG has said regarding that outcome.
And sorry, Senator, just if I may help, the Love and Tom's case particularly, those questions really should be directed to Home Affairs, but what I can say is that there's an awareness of the challenges that current legislation creates in terms of non-citizen and non-alien, which I think is where you're getting to, and I understand that they are considering a way forward in terms of that, but those specifics around that should really be directed to Home Affairs.
So do you use the three-part definition or the Australian Education Regulation definition for your programs?
So the NIAA specifically uses, as does the broadly across the APSC, the three-part definition.
So you haven't used in NIAA the Australian Education Regulation? You
No,
use the
Senator.
three-point test that's been in place for 40 years?
I might need to take that on notice. I'm trying to be helpful.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's
I'm just
fine.
trying to understand the context of the education regulation.
Well, you could answer it this way, or I could ask it this way. Is the three-part definition the only definition that you use to determine whether somebody is eligible for funding of any of your programs?
Certainly in the NIAA we use the three-part definition, which is, just to be clear, so we're talking about the same things, ancestry, self-identification and being recognised. So that's what
The
I'm
three-part
talking
definition,
about
yes.
when I'm referring to
The
it,
one
yes.
that's been in place 40 years, not the Australian Education Regulation, and you don't use StatDex?
Yes, we do use StatDex, Senator.
Right. Okay, when do you use StatDex?
It's in a range of circumstances.
So that's a self-identification.
Yes, Senator.
Right, thank you. I want to ask a question about when NIAA gives money to an organisation or agency, what due diligence do you go through in relation to those organisations that get funding?
Sure, Senator. Mr Khan is going to come to the table, or Mr Jeffries may answer.
CEO Operations and Delivery. I'll get my colleague Mr Khan to answer your question.
Thank you.
Good evening, Senator. Vance Khan, Group Manager, Program Performance Delivery. There's a range of tests and inquiries we do make before grants are issued out to organisations. Part of those is looking through the organisational structure of the organisation. We go back through other means to find out through the regulators. That can include the Australian Tax Office. It's through the Australian Security Investment Commission to ensure that appropriate controls and other checks are conducted. Internally, we do internal governance investigations, and we look at the entity as a holistic organisation, looking at the governance, financial structure and their performance overall.
Mr Khan, is that for every organisation that gets funded?
Absolutely, yes, Senator. As each grant round that comes through in each organisation, and they receive an organisational risk profile measure.
So when you're talking about looking through the structure, do you do searches of the internet? Do you investigate whether any of the members of that leadership team, board members, have been investigated or are under investigation by anybody at all, whether they have serious criminal convictions or they are under investigation for serious criminal convictions? What do you look at? So the org structure is one thing, but individuals that make up are different.
Senator, we rely on the regulated controls that are in place. The Security Investments Commission, the Tax Office, Commonwealth and State, Territory, government agencies that comprise things like the Phoenix Task Force will give us that information. We also look throughout at the financial profiles.
So through that due diligence test that you're doing, you're pretty confident that you're not giving funds to people who are currently under investigation or who have serious criminal histories?
We have a range of controls in place, Senator, and the range of controls in place is only as good as we're able to apply them.
Senator Little, I'm just going to flag that we're going to take a short tea break at 9. So once you've finished this bracket and get to about, then we'll do that.
So I've got about 2 other questions, if you can indulge me, Chair.
That'd be terrific.
So, so when you're talking about due diligence, that is, do you look at whether that organisation itself has a fit and proper person test within its governance structure?
We look, Senator, to see that the people in the positions are bona fide and they meet our tests there through the regulated controls.
Mr Khan, how many organisations did NIAA fund in the past 2 years that have been under investigation by either the administrator, by ORIC, by police, by fraud organisations? Can you provide that data?
Senator, we have someone who might be able to help you with that
Thank you.
now, who's just coming to the table.
Thank you.
Senator Sam White, Acting Chief Operating Officer. So I think the question, Senator, was organisations that we're investigating, is that right?
Yeah, given that you've got a due diligence process that has been explained by Mr Khan, how many organisations did you fund in the last 2 years that might have slipped through the cracks, so to speak, because you've since found out or that they are under investigation by police, by regulators, by fraud branches, or you've funded organisations that have people within it that have serious criminal
Senator,
histories?
Peter Nunn, Acting Branch Manager, Program Compliance Fraud Branch. In relation to that question, it's difficult to answer because of natural justice. When organisations or individuals are under investigation, usually it's not made public or commented on because it may compromise the investigation or put people at risk. So, but if there's been a conviction, then that information becomes public knowledge, and that's accessible, as Mr Khan pointed out, through the range of due diligence checks that are undertaken.
So if I understand what you're saying, so you could tell me through information once there's been a conviction recorded and that matter has closed, but you can't tell me how many are currently under investigation or under administration or fall into any of those categories, but even with a number?
I think we can give it, Senator, but the details of the specific cases we'd be hesitant to go into. But as at 30 September this year, we had 19 open fraud cases, totalling approximately $11 million in potential fraud. Importantly, that fraud is still being investigated and obviously hasn't gone before the courts.
Thank you, Senator Liddle.
And that's in the last, one more question, it's only a short
Okay.
one. And that's in the last 2 years, or is that?
No, that's an as-at date. So that's how many, some of those matters could be a number of years old because fraud investigations can take a long time. And also we might discover an instance of potential fraudulent behaviour, this year that may have actually occurred 2 or 3 years ago. So that's what we've got on our books at the moment, if that makes sense.
But you'd be able to provide that. Thank you, if you could, to this committee.
Okay, we will suspend until 9:15 and we will see, and I will give the call to Senator Thorpe. Thank you. Thank you. I will, once officers at the table and the Minister are ready, I'll give the call to Senator Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are about the Jervis Bay bill and consultation, because obviously I've heard from community that the so-called community consultations were more like information sessions where it was laid before them what the proposed changes in the bill are, but community weren't given an opportunity to ask questions or provide input straight from the community mouth this is. So can you please tell me exactly what community consultation has taken place, including dates, location and mode of engagement, please?
Thank you for that question, Senator. Ms Kerrigan.
So Rachel Kerrigan, Land Branch Manager. So, Senator, the consultations occurred over the period from August 2020 until most recent consultations were general information sessions in August this year. Across that time, I can run through the full list of the consultation sessions if that would be useful.
If you could provide that on notice. It's more, the community is saying that they were information sessions rather than consultation, and that they weren't able to have a say on the bill. They weren't able to provide input into the bill. It was just basically an FYI to the community. Is that right?
I think across the course of that multiple year period, there was a range of ways in which consultation occurred and community members had the opportunity to talk directly with staff, and the bill was developed in consultation and as part of those ongoing discussions across the course of the 2 years, Senator.
So the consultation process was that community could talk to staff?
There was a range of ways that the consultation was
Could you explain what those ways were?
So there were different types of drop-in sessions. For example, there were specific sessions held with elders, other sessions held with youth. There were men's and women's subcommittee conversations. At different points then, the proposed reforms and feedback were presented and worked through with the WEBAC, the Rec Bay, Aboriginal Community Council Executive Committee. That committee would meet to discuss the content of the reforms, and then ultimately the bill, and the WEBAC Executive Committee endorsed the bill.
Yes, thank you. What about the community? You spoke to the organisation of Rec Bay. What about the community of Rec Bay? Did they have an opportunity, or were they just provided the FYI consultations? So what you're telling me and what the community are saying are completely two different things. And they're watching right now. So they want to know, how did you get the community's feedback into the bill that affects them?
So members of the community were invited to participate in those various sessions across the 2-year period.
And what did the sessions involve? Did they involve an opportunity for community to provide feedback and to be able to question some of the elements of the bill that they're not happy with?
The sessions, so I wasn't personally at the sessions, Senator, but my understanding is that the way the sessions, that as part of that, yes, there was different reforms then talked about, and the opportunity for members to ask questions and community members to ask questions and provide feedback on the detail of those, of all of the subject of the conversations.
Is there any evidence of that in terms of minutes from those consultations where community actually provided feedback about their concerns of the bill?
I'll need to take the detail of that on notice around the evidence that then was collected as part of the session, Senator.
Okay, thank you. My next question is quickly going to youth services, and I had the mob from Redfern reach out and tell me that the Redfern Youth Connect is in trouble, and that they received $165,000 a year for 3 years. Is that correct?
Senator, my colleague Marnie Wetnall, the group manager for Eastern, I don't know whether she's still online. She would be able to respond to that. Is there anything specific? What's the specifics of the question?
The specifics of the question is that Redfern Youth Connect is a self-determined community-controlled organisation that provides essential youth services at a cost of around $825 a year, which works out to just over $2 a day per child. And it costs, so the community is saying it costs the government almost $2,000 a day to keep our kids in New South Wales lock up, and that this Redfern Youth Connect is at risk of closing its doors to our young people. So they're saying to us that it's cheaper to fund them than it is to lock the kids up.
Senator, what I can tell you is that Redfern Youth Connect do have a current contract in place until the 31st of December 2022, and they've been advised that this contract will be extended for 2 years, and the National Indigenous Australians Agency is currently working with the organisation to provide additional funding to support their increase in demand.
Do you know how much the additional funding will be?
I have to take that on notice, Senator.
Thank you. And I just have some questions around cultural heritage, and then I'm done. So we're currently witnessing First Nations people in Marajuga, the Beetaloo Basin and elsewhere watching on as major developments destroy their cultural heritage. In terms of the new heritage protection legislation, could you tell us how this will protect further sites from being destroyed?
Thanks, Senator. I'll pass that over to Ms Kelly.
I might just add, while we're waiting, Senator Thorpe, for Ms Kelly, that that the Minister for the Environment has the statutory responsibilities for this area, but I just wanted to add that in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Andrea Kelly, Acting Group Manager, Truth Telling Task Force. Sorry, can you repeat your question?
Well, basically, how is the new legislation going to stop further destruction of our land and water and air and totems?
So, Senator, as Senator Minister McCarthy pointed out, This is the responsibility of Minister Plibersek and her department. However, we do work closely with the department in terms of heritage protection. You would have seen this morning the tabling of the Dukin Gorge report. So we work closely with the department on that response and closely with the Alliance. They have been consulting around what new legislation would look like. They're on the second stage of consultations. They'll go through to next year, and with a report to government. And those consultations also will inform what the new legislation could look like.
Thank you. In terms of the announcement today, obviously traditional owners are very upset that the Minister announced the new legislation without those traditional owners being involved, causing great distress and disrespect. Will that continue, that kind of behaviour?
Can I jump in there, Senator Thorpe? I read the article of The Guardian today in relation to the concerns that were raised and the anger that was portrayed in that article, which concerned me as well. So I did inquire. I thought it was really important to understand what had happened here, if something had happened. And I did get a response from Minister Plibersek that they had attempted to engage with the PKKP on at least 4 occasions this week. And the Minister's office spoke to the PKKP Cultural Heritage Manager, and a meeting between the CEO and the Minister was also offered. But I'd also just like to put on the record, certainly if they are listening, that I'd like to follow up just to see where things are at as well.
Thank you. It'd be good to know how the Minister tried to contact the traditional owners, given we know what blackfellas have to deal with in this country, and the Ministers need to maybe make contact more than 4 times, that was stated in her response. And if there is a close consultation process, then usually you'd have someone's phone number to give a call, and maybe the community would have more trust next time. So, will NIAA assist the government in developing a National Heritage Register as called for by witnesses in the Jukan inquiry? And if so, is there a timeline for implementation?
So, Senator, as I mentioned, we work closely with the Environment Department. I sit on the working group, which also is, the Alliance also sit on that. Part of the consultations will inform those conversations. So, as I said, they don't wrap up until early next year, those consultations, being led by the department. They don't wrap up till next year, and a report will be provided to government, and that'll inform all of those conversations.
Thank you. And I just have one final question, very quick one. Is consultation consent? Anyone can answer that.
Just in terms of the consultations that are being led for this purpose, it is co-chaired between an officer of the department and one of the Alliance members, and I don't have it on me, and I can certainly table it or get the department next time they're on. Perhaps you can ask them.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I just want to, so I'm talking more broadly from the NIAA. Is consultation considered consent?
So, Senator, I think there's different levels, and probably the answer is no in a general sense, that you would want to put a whole range of principles around what you're doing in order to gain consent. And I think, Yeah, I'll just leave it there, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Senator
I'm
Little.
out. Good night, thanks for coming.
Sorry, Chair, it's Senator.
Senator Nampijinpa Price, my apologies.
Thank you. My questions would be in relation to the cessation of the Stronger Futures legislation in the Northern Territory.
Senator, my colleague who's online, Tom Dyer, in the Alice Springs office, he will answer those questions that you might have in relation to that.
Thank you. My questions are around what has been observed as the impact in Indigenous communities in the Northern Territory as a result of the cessation of this legislation.
We can't hear you, Tom.
I might just say I will give Senator Stewart, well, just work out your sound. I'll give Senator Stewart about 8 minutes in the middle, so you decide when you want to stop so that Senator Little can see the rest out, okay?
Okay.
Can we hear you?
I've just sent a message to the officer.
How about you just ask the questions, Senator Nampijinpa Price? And
So I'd like to understand what the statistics are on hospital admissions, arrests and rates of crime since the cessation of the legislation with regard to Stronger Futures legislation has taken place.
Senator, it's Rachel Jackson, Acting Group Manager of Central Group. We'll have to take that on notice. The data is the responsibility of the Northern Territory Government, so we'll take that on notice and see what we can provide.
Can you also please provide admissions to DV shelters, also what that looks like since the cessation?
We'll certainly see what we can provide, Senator.
Are you able to answer for me how the welfare of children who are affected in these communities is being addressed? I guess I've been hearing that children are being taken out of school because adults are driving into places like Alice Springs from communities like Nyirrapi and buying alcohol and then driving back, sometimes drunk. So it is of great concern to me, the welfare of the children affected. So I'd like to understand how this is being addressed.
So, Senator, we are working very closely with the Northern Territory Government on harm minimisation relating to alcohol. But if I can talk particularly to the situation following the sunsetting of the Stronger Futures legislation, there are 73 communities in the Northern Territory. For 70 of the 73 communities, there's no change to the alcohol restrictions because 67 of the communities were unaffected by the sunsetting. And since that consultation by the Northern Territory Government, 3 communities have opted in to restrictions.
Can I stop you there for a second? Because the reports that are coming back currently is that while there are some communities that still remain dry, there is confusion around the way the legislation has come to an end, and there are certainly increased rates of drunkenness and there is alcohol in communities that are dry. So I guess, what advice has the Minister been given with regard to these particular concerns?
I don't have those details. I'd have to take that on notice.
So has the Minister been advised of any changes to volume of alcohol being purchased in affected communities?
Sorry, Senator Nampijinpa Price, perhaps I can try and assist with some of your questions here.
Okay, and so what data is informing your investment?
Data in relation to, sorry, your previous question was about what information had the Minister received. I was just trying to understand what specifically you were asking around that.
Do you want to throw in a supplementary? I just want to ask a supplementary if I can, Chair. What data are you using to actually inform your investment post the dismantling of that particular
legislation? Oh, look, I know I'll go to the official in a moment, but one of the things that was really concerning about the ending of Stronger Futures was that there was no work done previously to that legislation ending to know what was going to happen beyond it. So hence the reason why I put forward in the Senate, with the assistance of Senator Nampijinpa Price, for a bipartisan committee of the Australian Parliament to actually examine exactly that, Senator Little, what steps have been taken prior to the ending of Stronger Futures, what steps were being taken to ensure the safety of families post Stronger Futures, and I look forward to that parliamentary committee finding out those answers.
Minister McCarthy, what I'm asking is, and people have to live in those communities while there's a separate Senate inquiry, but given NIAA was tasked with investing in programs with the withdrawal of that legislation, the question is, what data are you using to inform investment that's required, given what we know has happened since the withdrawal of that legislation?
Well, I think
that's about
the
data.
official has responded to that. They'll take that question on notice. But what I can say, in terms of the Minister and myself, as we've travelled throughout Central Australia, is that we have invested through the recent budget a significant amount for Central Australia, knowing that there have been requests through the election campaign and post that. And like you, I'm very interested to see what data comes through from the Northern Territory Government.
Can I ask then, what specific obligations does NIAA have to understanding the outcomes of the cessation of this legislation?
Senator Price, Tom Dyer, are you available to speak now? Are you back online?
Tom Dyer, branch manager. Does that work?
Yep,
yes.
That did. We can hear you now. Thanks.
Oh, okay, thank you. Sorry, can you repeat the question, if that's okay?
What is NIAA's role in terms of understanding the outcomes of the cessation of the Stronger Futures legislation, the results of that, what is NIAA's role in better understanding the circumstances on the ground?
Thank you, Senator. Just quickly, I mean, Stronger Futures is a multi-pronged piece of legislation that sunsetted. It had food security,
okay, specific to alcohol, can you please just specific to alcohol restrictions and the effects of alcohol within these very vulnerable communities?
Certainly. With regards to our role, we continue to monitor data and trends with regards to all our investment and try to tailor our investment to make sure that it's effective as possible. In the Northern Territory, we continue to invest a significant amount of funds with regards to alcohol and other drug services. So we have a $13 million investment to 12 organisations through the IAS, and on top of that, we provide $11 million through the NT Remote Aboriginal Investment National Partnership Agreement.
And what is the dollar figure since the cessation of the Stronger Futures legislation?
The dollar figure hasn't dropped. The dollar figure is what I just stated.
In relation to the budget?
That's our current investment level.
Yes. So you're unclear on the figure and you're also unclear with regard to the data. Does NIAA have the capacity to act act immediately, given the anecdotal evidence suggests there's some critical issues going on with regard to the availability of alcohol in these vulnerable communities again?
With regards to the availability of alcohol in communities that alcohol is restricted, that's a matter for the Northern Territory Police. Obviously, it would be an issue of probably law enforcement.
So basically, despite the investments made, we have no clear idea of what the assessment of the data, because there is obviously no data at this stage, is telling us what is going on in these communities that are currently being affected by alcohol, where the anecdotal evidence is fairly evident that there's a crisis going on, and NIAA can't actually tell us in clear terms what that looks like right now.
Senator, with regards to if it was alcohol misuse illegal, that would be obviously a matter for the NT Police. General statistics with regards to alcohol harm and other crime rates are all publicly available on the NT government data portal, which all people can access. With regards to that, I believe the NT government have just released a new website with refreshed data.
Okay, but that's not a responsibility of the NIAA to understand that in order to, given the investment that is made through NIAA to monitor that. There's not much monitoring going on, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Well, Senator, we do work very closely with the Northern Territory Government, and there's an exchange of information about, particularly looking at the NT government's data. So we're having ongoing conversations about where we might need to boost our investment. And of course, we're also involved in the social order response team in Alice Springs, working with traditional owners and the mayor and the local council down there. So we've ongoing conversations. That implementation council meets fortnightly, and my colleague Mr Matthews is our representative on that implementation team. So there's definitely a strong focus on it.
Well, that's wonderful to understand there's a strong focus. It's the reason why I guess I'm drafting a bill to put back those alcohol restrictions, because the evidence is clear anecdotally that there are huge problems, and I guess it's deeply concerning that I can't get a clear answer through NIAA with regard to
Senator
data, specifically with regard to data.
We've got very limited time, and I did want to make
and
sure
how the welfare
Senator
of children
Stewart
is
got
being
the
affected.
call, and that Senator Little is also able to ask questions. I give Senator Stewart the call.
Thank you, Senator Pratt. I'm really pleased to hear the line of questioning that comes to the safety of children and women, because my questions relate to the Family Violence Prevention Legal Service funding. Can you remind me when the funding was cut for the forum and how much was cut?
Thank you very much, Senator. Since you're not in the room, I'll just advise you that Mr Ben Burden's coming to the table.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Ben Burden, Group Manager for Social Policy and Programs. Sorry, I was just... When was the... so if your question was, when was the funding cut to the Family Violence Prevention Legal Service Forum?
Correct. And how much?
And how much? Senator, if I may take that on notice and come back to you with the precise dates and the amounts of money, the formula, and if I might explain it's a little complicated because the funding formula to the forum was based on membership contributions from the different family violence prevention legal service providers. And so I just want to make...
I can help you out a little bit there if you like. I think it was around $3 million.
Yeah, so and then the amount of money that was restored to the forum was $3 million in the recent budget announcement.
So we had funding restored. Yep. And so does that match the amount that was cut by the former government?
Again, I'll have to go back and do my sums to make sure that I'm providing you with the right amount of detail. But yes, the amount of money provided to the forum is $3 million, and we are in the process of discussing a funding agreement with the forum and to get that money to them as quickly as possible.
I'm very glad to hear that. Can you just, for the record and for my own purposes, just talk me through what some of the work of the forum is and kind of who sits on that body?
So the forum is a membership, a peak organisation, if you will, for family violence prevention legal service providers. They, as the name suggests, they provide a range of family violence supports to women and children across the country, including legal services as well. But it's really, they operate on a full spectrum of activity from prevention right through to healing. And really bring a multifaceted approach to the supports that they offer to women and children that either may be at risk of violence or have in fact are victim survivors of violence.
Okay, and what was the type of work that the forum did specifically? So you talked about the kind of what some of the work of the service providers who were on there did, but what was the real benefit of bringing people together, those service providers together?
So if I may, and I do, with respect to the forum, I'm characterising their work, so I do caveat what I'll say with respect to their work, and I'd note that. So the role of the forum will be to provide that kind of classic backbone, overarching kind of peak organisation role. It will allow and enable their advocacy work and to strengthen and enhance their ability to kind of to analyse both what their members are doing, the data that they're seeing, the types of responses that they provide, and to improve and generally enable and support and improve the continue to strengthen the service provision of their members and providers, and ultimately provide continue to strengthen the supports that they offer to women and children.
Okay. It sounds like it provided an incredible amount of benefit more broadly to the Aboriginal family violence sector, and particularly as it relates to Aboriginal women and children. So I'm really quite astounded that the former government cut the funding, given how much they really want to focus right now. While they have no power in opposition, they really want to focus on the experiences of women and children in our country. It's a bit rich, if you ask me. So can you just talk to me about the kind of the reception that we've had from family service providers about the restoration of this funding? What's the feedback you've heard from providers on the ground about the ability to come back together? What will that do?
So Ms Hope and I had a good conversation with the forum earlier this week. They're very keen to get on with the work that this amount of money will enable them to do, and they're very much looking forward to making a contribution to the government's commitment to a dedicated action plan for First Nations women and children to prevent violence towards them, and also down the track to the dedicated national plan as well.
So was this forum working on the national plan against the prevention of family violence against women and children?
So, Senator, I'll kind of, again, if I may caveat my comments, noting that the work on the national plan and the work on the action plan, the action plan is being worked through with the Department of Social Services, which has the lead for that, and Minister Rishworth, and there's an advisory council that is working on the action plan, and again Minister Rishworth and the DSS have the carriage of the national plan as well, and we are working very closely with them, and as a key service provider in the sector, the forum and the FVPLS providers will no doubt make an extremely valuable contribution to that work.
So, but were they working on this previously and they had to stop because the funding was cut, or was...
No, my understanding is that they, and I'll need to again take this on notice just to clarify the precise details, but we have been working with Ms. Oscar, the Commissioner for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. She held a forum some weeks back which was focused on providing inputs to the action plan, and that released a statement following that day of consultations, and I would just need to check who precisely attended that day of consultations. But I'm if my memory serves me correct, that the FVPLS providers and forum were part of that conversation.
Yes, thanks, Senator. I'm sure we can get the list of people who attended. It was well over, it was like about 160, and many of the forum members were there. I was on that forum for most of the day as well.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Stewart. Your final question.
Can I just ask one more question?
Yes,
Sorry,
you
I've
may.
got one more question. I'm just wondering about what the impact will have been on people's ability to contribute, given that there's having to rebuild again, pull the forum together again on the national, into the national plan and conversation.
Senator, respectfully, I'm kind of reluctant to try to hazard a guess at a historical hypothetical, and I'll leave it there.
That's right. I might be able to contribute something here. I imagine there would have been a gap in the voices and representation of First Nations women and children for a number of years because their funding was cut. So I might just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Stewart. Senator Little.
Thank you. I just wanted to be very clear about a question that I have about the Northern Territory and the devastation that is there that I've seen for myself since the removal of the CDC and the Stronger Futures. And what I'm actually after is not the amount of money that was allocated in the budget. I want to know how much money has been provided to those communities since the 1st of July, and has that money that you may have allocated, or have you increased the allocation, has that money actually hit those providers that would be supporting those communities given the escalating devastation in those communities?
We can take that on notice, Senator, and provide that information for you.
Thank you. My last questions relate to Eupla funerals, if you can have somebody help me with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Ms. Fulton will join us at the table.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Fulton. The current settings for Eupla Group Benefits Program only applies to members of the funds who have already passed away. Is support being considered for members of the fund who invested money but are still alive?
Thank you, Senator. You're correct that the program is in place for those that were a member on or after 1 April 2020, and the program's an interim measure while the government investigates what further steps are required to bring resolution to the matter.
So the answer is there hasn't been a decision, but it's still under consideration.
That's correct, Senator.
Okay. So what advice did the Minister receive from NIAA in terms of developing the eligibility criteria for this program?
I think questions of detail for this measure, which are Treasury-led, just to put that on the record, that some of your questions might be better led by Treasury. But in terms of NIAA's role, we did have discussions with the Save Sorry Business Coalition to get an understanding of what they were hearing from policyholders and what the immediate concerns were. And we did convey some of that advice in information to the Minister around the nature of the potential problems and the immediate steps that government might wish to take.
And in terms of consultation that took place, what consultation did the Minister or the Department undertake with affected families prior to announcing the program and how you would respond to it?
There has been a long history with this particular issue, as I think you're probably aware, Senator, and there have been different involvements from different agencies over an extended period. So ASIC and Treasury, I believe, had ASIC had obviously a regulatory function and had provided advice, which I would need you to, I can't speak on their behalf. As I mentioned, the Save Sorry Business Coalition has been playing an important advocacy role, and given, of course, the delicate nature of the circumstances and the trauma that families were already encountering, the priority was to put something in place immediately so that people could bury their loved ones and undertake sorry business as an important interim measure.
I'm just reminding everyone that we're adjourning at 10 o'clock.
I thought you indicated you would give me 10 minutes. And,
well, no, I was very clear. I said I was giving Senator Stewart the call in the middle of your time.
And we had
so
20 minutes left. We had 20 minutes left at that point.
You want to see my recording sheet? Senator Stewart.
For opposition senators, not for Labor senators, the time waste, which is what's been happening.
Senator McGrath, you're wasting your colleagues' time.
Can I please ask my questions?
Yes.
And thank you. I do recall that 10 minutes before I'd expected to have the call, but anyway, there we go. So how was the cut-off date determined, and what was the amount, what's anticipated as the total amount of payment that's going to be required to settle this program?
So for this program that's in place at the moment that Treasury leads on, so I will just caveat my responses with my understanding of the measure, but detailed questions should really go to Treasury. The program that's in place at the moment is anticipated to cost $7.2 million over 22-23 and 23-24. We have an estimation that the program may be paying around 520 claims in that period. And I'm sorry, Senator, the first part of I think I've answered the second question, but I've missed the first.
Just got a couple of quick questions. So is ASIC playing any role in this?
Beg your pardon?
ASIC, are they playing any role in this?
They played a role in providing information, and obviously had the regulatory function in the lead up. They are not specifically involved, as far as I'm aware, in this particular program right now.
Okay. So how are you making sure that families who may be eligible under that, but also for any change in your eligibility, if that is to take place, how are you going to make sure that you reach as many people as possible and that they're not ripped off subsequently from new programs?
Senator, again, the program that's in place at the moment is an interim measure, and while government investigates what further steps may be required. So I can't speak for that process. And the program that's in place right now is this interim measure just to help families of deceased Euclid Group policyholders so that they can get on with their sorry business.
Did that prompt the department at all to look at other providers across Australia providing funeral services to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people?
So primarily the regulatory function here with ASIC, NIAA doesn't play an ongoing role in looking at the nature of insurance products and policy
I don't
holders.
think that's not my question, and I'm sorry if you
Senator-
misunderstood. I just want to clarify the actual
Senator
question,
Little,
please.
we are coming back next week. We are supposed
1
to
minute
move
past.
on to other topics, but you did traverse.
Well, you've just wasted 1 minute of my time.
No, there is no more time,
Yeah, because
Senator
you did
Little.
offer
Let's
time
be
and you
clear.
haven't
We
allowed it.
I gave you the offer to share the remaining time with Senator Price. I said I would give Senator Stewart 8 minutes. She got
Well,
8
that's the whole
and a
purpose
half.
of estimates.
And
More than 8. More than 8. My colleague is asking for one final question, and you're refusing that question. Is this what Labor's about? One final question we're asking.
I'm telling you that we're coming back next Tuesday anyway, and that we have a long day
And so all
of
these
sitting
witnesses
tomorrow.
can be here to answer that one final question?
I will make a note of that question, and I will make sure that we ask that question and we have appropriate.
It could have been
fair,
answered
balanced
by now,
time
by the way.
before we
Oh.
go. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to all the officials here tonight,
Thank
to
you,
the
everyone.
Minister. And we will all see each other tomorrow, and we will see the NIAA along with Prime Minister and Cabinet AGs next Tuesday night. Thank you.
Thank you.